Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to start with a personal note. When I joined these type of events, can you hear me? Yeah. When I join these type of events, I always start looking at the people who have joined this session. And coming from a small country, Belgium, I always look at it whether there's other people from Belgium. I'm very pleased to see that there's three of us with two, I would say, very well-known Belgian-sounding names, Catania Salvatore, and then Leonardo Sforza from Belgium. So I'm very pleased there's three of us. First of all, thank you for inviting me to this event. I have already heard a lot of interesting presentations. I specifically loved what Professor Savona yesterday had to say about fiscal asymmetries and how this is causing illicit trade. I'm here to talk about the topic technology at the service of traceability. And I'm going to give you the key message that I'm providing today during my session. It is that technology can be a key tool in the fight against illicit trade, but it is nothing more than this tool. What I will share with you today is just a small and quick introduction into the company I work for. It's Atos, and then a sub-group within Atos is Worldline. That's why my name, the name Worldline was mentioned. And then the competence center that I'm part of. This will explain why I'm here and why I'm asked to talk about this topic. I will share with you some of our key findings with regards to establishing effective tracking and tracing solutions. I will just give you an example of a project of that, where it went well. And then I will conclude with reflecting on the EU Tobacco Products Directive. I understand all of you in one way or another from a public or private sector background are related to the tobacco business. So that will be what I have to do with you. So without further ado, I'm working for Atos, which is a large IT and consultancy firm. There's about 100,000 people working for this company. So in IT words, this is a medium to large size company. We do about 12 billion euro revenue on a yearly basis. And we have a workforce pretty much anywhere in the world. This is just to give you a flavor of what a classic IT company these days does. We've got own data centers. We can manage applications. Whenever there's an issue with hardware, we can help you with that. This is, I would say, the classic IT side of things. I'm part of a global center of competence focusing on tracking and tracing and on what we call, in the broader terms, value chain integrity. We are talking to public sector and private sector. We help private and public sector fight issues such as counterfeit, smuggling, and tax fraud. That means we have a decent understanding of different technologies which enable authentication and identification of goods and what you can do with that. Once you have authenticated or identified a good, you can start tracking and tracing it. We've done a fair portion of our projects already, and just to give you an idea, the systems that we operate on a yearly basis cover 700 million products that we track and trace and authenticate. This is a bit the approach that we normally take. It's the approach of a classical system integration service. That means we try to understand what our customer tries to achieve. And then based on those requirements, we design, build, and run a system. We've done that in multiple industries, notably tobacco, pharmaceutical, beverages, any good pretty much that that suffers from fake and counterfeit we have looked at in one way or another. We do that on understanding, first of all, the regulatory framework that these products are against. And given our global reach with Atos, we're capable of following our customers wherever they are. We are not owning any software or hardware ourselves. We look and probe at the market and try to find what products are out there, and then we use those products as building blocks for coming with bespoke solutions for our customers. And then I'm going to give you a bit of an insight into what we call the key business drivers for our customers. Why are they talking to us about tracking and tracing and authentication? There's all kinds of reasons depending on the market you're in, but I have listed here a few of them. I think regulatory compliance is one of the key topics that we're going to discuss today, but most of the time a lot of products.
Mi scusi. Mi dicono i bulgari che il canale 7 della traduzione non funziona.
That's okay. Working for a technology company, we could have some fun and try to do with Google Translate, but I trust you think it's a better thing to sort out the translation. Can I proceed or? Okay, perfect. Good. So there's quite a few companies working with their brands and actually having nothing else but their brand, and they are at many times faced with counterfeit people who just try to abuse their brand, and this is causing, for instance, a risk of reputational risk management. That's the thing that then, for instance, they talk to us about. But that's just an overview of the different kinds of challenges that we help our customers with. Then moving on to probably a bit more interesting, and I realize I'm standing between you and the weekend, so I'm gonna move on fast. This is just a view of what technology today is capable of, and pretty much, I should say, with technology you can achieve whatever you want these days. It provides you a bit of an overview of the solutions that we can deliver to our customers, and it goes from the sourcing, the raw materials which actually manufacturers are using for creating their product, then moving on to selling that to wholesalers and distributors, and then actually the last step where the consumer could verify what product or what services he or she is acquiring. This is actually the complete value chain, as we call it, that we can cover. Tobacco Products Directive, for that matter, is just covering the two middle blocks, as you know, and I will get back to that in a short while. This is what I just explained. The EU Tobacco Products Directive is actually, for us right now, a key business driver. A lot of companies are looking into regulatory compliance because they must, they can't avoid. It's a matter of being allowed to do what they do. This is not only in the tobacco industry. The Falsified Medicines Directive, for instance, which coincidentally has the same timeline for implementing, next year in 2019, is an example of how other industries are also looking into authentication, and then for Tobacco Product Directive, a tracking and tracing solution. We've gone, we go back as far as 2009 when it comes to the competence center, so we've been involved in quite a few interesting projects. And we followed, for that matter, the forming of the implementing acts of the Tobacco Products Directive as from the start. And I came across some of the key considerations that we shared with the outside world, notably the European Commission at some stage, back in 2014 when they started. And I think these are actually the key elements that we have, based on our experience, well known to understand that these are the key things we should think of when trying to establish effective tracking and tracing. So for EU TPD at that time, in 2014, we specifically said that authentication and tracking and tracing, when you implement such a system, it should be part of a broader strategy to fight illicit trade. The establishment of a tracking and tracing solution is not going to help illicit trade in one way. I mean, you need to have a strategy, and I think this is the most important assignment to public authorities. How are you going to really use this tool to overcome the issue of illicit trade? We also advocate for establishing what we call preventive and predictive systems. It translates back to what are you going to do with the data that is now, for instance, for the Tobacco Products Directive being gathered. You can do a lot with that if you start combining it with all kinds of other unstructured data which all consumers, all companies leave on the internet. What we believe as well is very important is that you try to cooperate with the industry and the impacted stakeholders. Most of the companies who suffer from counterfeit in one way or another, they dispose of a lot of intelligence and a lot of experience when it comes to authenticating their own products. So collaborating with these stakeholders to us makes perfect sense. And then the last thing that we always advocate for is that you need to think of the global aspect of illicit trade. So if you want to set up a solution, make sure it is interoperable. Base yourself on open standards. Guido referred to a successful project. It is a successful project because of these open standards. Moving on to an interesting example, which is related to tobacco products, and that was in Lithuania. We were talking to the government of Lithuania for quite some time about the key issue that they are faced with, which is, well, they actually lose about 30% of tax income due to illicit trade contraband, mainly coming from well-known countries, thanks to Professor Savona, White Russia and Belarus. It's obviously for a small country such as Lithuania, quite an impact on their public revenue. So when we started talking on how we could help them, these were the objectives that we agreed upon. They want to obviously fight against illicit trade because of the sheer issue this is causing on the broader economy. They wanted to increase their tobacco tax income. And for that reason, they introduced a tobacco control system. They did that in close collaboration with the tobacco industry, and this is actually the result of it. And this, after a mere 1 year, it actually resulted in about 10 million euro extra revenue income for the government of Lithuania, and a reduction of about 29% of illicit trade. I'm coming back to my key message to you. This is just a tool, and the only reason why the results were what they are is because also the Lithuanian authorities thought about how to use that system. So they invested as well in extra border control. They have invested in the system, but they really started using it. And that is actually the successful combination for establishing effectively tracking and tracing solutions. And then to conclude, a bit of a reflection on the EU Tobacco Products Directive. We have discussed at length the scope of the Tobacco Products Directive. All manufacturers in EU or in Europe or importing into EU must put data into a repository, and then all wholesalers and distributors treating that those products also need to put these data in that central database imposed by the EU. But I've been asked a couple of times, will it work and what will it bring to the EU? And actually, I'm going to go and just share with you at some stage back in July last year, I was asked and invited to speak to the European Parliament, the Committee on Budgetary Control, the chairman, which is actually a woman, but anyways, she asked me to come and give our humble opinion on how the Tobacco Products Directive and the discussions at that time were going. But she also asked me a couple of key questions, and then this was twofold. Could the EU track and trace system contribute to solving problems such as illicit whites? And then the other reflection she wanted me to address was what are the chances that other countries outside the EU would actually take over the standards which by now the EU Tobacco Products Directive have established. I found it an interesting one because at that time the discussions run by DG Sante were very much ongoing. And I'm going to share with you my response related to the first question, could the EU track and trace system contribute to solving problems such as illicit whites? The tracking and tracing system is basically going to give an overview of the legal supply chain. By default, illicit whites or contraband or whatever issue that we're discussing is illicit. So nobody in that scene cares about the Tobacco Products Directive. So by default, you don't have a view on anything which is happening. What I did say at that time, and I firmly believe that, it's how you're going to use the tracking and tracing data. Because if you start combining that information with other available data on the internet, you can really come to interesting insights into the illicit trade. As to the second question, what are the chances the other countries that are parties to the FCTC protocol would take over the EU track and trace system or standards? This question by default reassured me of the fact that the EU and the Parliament realizes that the problem with regards to illicit trade of tobacco goods is not an EU issue only, it is an international phenomenon. So how are you going to make sure that the EU regulation in one way or another will reinforce also Article 8 of the Framework Convention of Tobacco Control from WHO? And according to us, the only way you can make these things work is again by going to the open standards, which, to reassure you, in the end, the European Commission decided to put in the system which they have now voted. But we at the time thought, if you make it complex for other countries to link their system to the Tobacco Products Directive system, you're actually going to give these countries a good reason to say, guys, this is too complex, I'm not going to join, and subsequently the issue with regards to White Russia, Belarus, illicit whites would just remain. So I think there is a chance we can really use the Tobacco Products Directive and the system, the track and trace system behind it, for the purpose of reducing illicit trade. Interestingly, I also attended this event which was organized by Euractiv a while ago, which was talking about the EU collaboration between EU and Belarus. And you see at that time there was actually a councillor representing Belarus who came to talk to members of parliament in the EU about, well, a good collaboration. And I found it really interesting because the EU has decided to put a Tobacco Products Directive system and impose it on the industry, causing, I should not say cause, but still, this means there's going to be literally hundreds of millions being spent on a system, and That's quite a substantial budget, I would say. Whereas an alternative, in my personal opinion, could be to just talk to Belarus and see how you can come to an agreement and try to reduce the issue of illicit whites. I could feel from that session that Belarus is all open and just looks at it as a negotiation. So it's perhaps an interesting alternative, or combining it with the Tobacco Products Directive could be a way to fight illicit trade. Moving to the end, we're used to the world that we live in right now, where we just look at, we go on the internet and we just find the information that we want today. We leave by default a lot of information about ourselves, about what our interests are, what products we are looking at, and we feel comfortable with that. We give that information to all kinds of companies, and they exploit it, because the day after you get very bespoke offers for the product, for the products or the trips that you have looked into, and we feel comfortable with that. I would like to conclude with referring to a question which Mr. Baldanza put on the table, a very important question about who will manage the data from the Tobacco Products Directive. But I would like to add this question: what will the authorities do with this data? How will authorities translate this data into valuable information? And then valuable information means a tool to fighting illicit trade. And that's where I would like to conclude by saying again that technology can be a key tool to fighting illicit trade, but it's just a tool. Thank you for your attention.